Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 171 of the Meet the Farmers podcast with me, Ben Eagle. Now, today, or at least the day that this is being released on, the 10th of October, is World Mental Health Day, which is organised by the World Health Organization to raise awareness of mental health issues around the world and to mobilise efforts in support of mental health. Now, anybody who has been listening to the podcast for a while, or indeed if you read any of the farming news or follow farming campaigns, you'll know that mental health awareness has become at least part of the conversation we have in the farming world. And I actually personally want to say thank you to the rest of the farming podcasting community. You know who you are, for all the mentions and discussions that you've had about mental health over the last few years. But we need to keep on going, hence why I'm doing this today. And many people say that there is still a stigma. And in 2021, the Farm Safety Foundation published the results of a survey which found that 88% of farmers under 40 rank poor mental health as the biggest hidden problem facing the industry. And really, I mean, until we break the stigma and make it clear that the important thing is that we talk about how we're feeling, we're not going to make progress with that. I myself have, and I've been open in previous episodes about this before. I've suffered with depression and anxiety quite a bit in the past. And back when I had my sheep a few years back, I remember some really quite dark days during lambing, a particular lambing season when I was really struggling, and my business partner at the time and my family were absolutely brilliant in helping me get through that. But yeah, I have a terrible capacity for taking on too much, which sometimes leads to issues. But I know this now, so I can remind myself of things that are leading down the wrong path. And I know I'm sort of rambling here. I'm saying this because I think it's important. Practice what you preach, and I need to be open about where I'm coming from as well. So mental health in farming is something that I think we really need to keep talking about. And the person who is joining me today on the show has done so much more than most to make sure that mental health is something that we are talking about. Emma O'Sullivan is with me, founder of the DPJ Foundation, which she set up in 2016 in memory of her and husband, Daniel Picton-Jones. The foundation is there to support people in the agricultural sector who are suffering with poor mental health. Daniel was an agricultural contractor whose mental health issues were undiagnosed and were unseen by many. Emma, good evening. Thank you for coming on the show. It's an absolute pleasure and privilege having you here. How is your week going?
It's going really well. Thank you so much for asking me to come along. I feel like it's been a long time since I've actually got out and talked to someone and done something like this. So It's really lovely to kind of be involved. So thank you very much. But yeah, it's been a good week. It's been okay. It's tough, but I think everyone's finding it tough. The weather's changed and it's
it is, isn't it?
Great.
It's that time. Because I always think I like autumn, and I do like autumn, but it's when autumn turns, isn't it, into this sort of middle bit when it goes a little bit further on.
I'm definitely like a summer person. I prefer the warm weather. Like, I don't want to say anything too much, but like, give me that heat wave back. I would quite happily be in like 30 degrees right now.
Yeah, it's just the best time. But anyway, we will embrace autumn and winter. So you're in Pembrokeshire. Tell us about your part of the world.
Yeah, so I feel really fortunate to be from Pembrokeshire, especially that, when we had the summer that we had, I feel like, we're on holiday kind of all summer, and being a teacher, we get those kind of nice 7 weeks off we had, and there's no better place to be. It's, we kind of got the sea surrounding us on three sides, and it's just a really wonderful place to be. Everybody knows everybody. I think it's quite fair to say we've got quite a small population, but sometimes it's also, you feel like you're kind of stuck out of the way a little bit. We're kind of far away from anything and everything, and you have to travel miles to get anywhere, but I'd never change it. I kind of love where I live, and I live right in the centre of Pembrokeshire as well, so I'm kind of right in the middle of everywhere, and it's a beautiful place to live.
Nice. And you said that you're a teacher. Was that something that you always wanted to do?
I don't know really. I suppose it sounds really strange, but I was kind of like thrown into it a little bit. I remember sort of doing my GCSEs and there was this big thing about choosing your A levels and having to kind of make sure the A level you choose are the ones that the job you want to get. And I was thinking, well, I don't know what job I want to get. And then someone was like, oh, you're really good with children. And I was like, okay, I'll just be a teacher. And that was it. And that's kind of how it happened.
That's how it happened.
Yeah. And I try to make out to my students, this is all I've always wanted to do. It was like in my blood, but literally it was just like that. It was like, what else can I do? Oh, that'll be fine. And yeah, and kind of growing up on a farm, and I was kind of always involved in that, but there was never really the kind of discussion about it ever leading to being a job. And to be honest, having a brother at that time and in that day and age, it was never an option but it wasn't that it wasn't an option, but it wasn't never the given thing for the daughter to kind of go ahead. So yeah. I was kind of quite happy to go off and do my sort of degree and leave everyone else to it at that point, which now has kind of turned full circle because I'm back on the farm and doing bits as well. So fantastic. It's been quite nice, really.
Yeah, because I mean, am I right in thinking, I don't know where I remember this from? Was it a dairy farm?
Yeah, so I'm actually sitting in the milking parlour right now.
Cool.
We say we are in Pembrokeshire, beautiful part of the world, but actually riddled with TB, especially the part I live in. Yeah. So we had quite horrendous situation where we had TB for many, many years. And I think it got to the point where Dad was just fed up of losing so many animals. And it was kind of getting to that point where he had the decision to make, which was, I keep putting myself through this, or I actually try and make something and do a change and make a change. And he decided to make a change. So, and it was actually not long after Dan had died that he decided to get rid of the cows. And he finished in milking altogether. And so I was like, wow, that's a really nice building. I know what I can do with that. And I turned it into a house. So fantastic. I'm actually sat now, which is what would have been the old collecting yard, has changed a little bit. But yeah, so we've kind of moved back and we've now kind of not restarted the farm. But yeah, my dad and I have kind of got some sheep together, and we've got pigs and ducks and things like that. And it's a really wonderful place to be back and at home and kind of bringing my children up around the same upbringing I had, and without so less lovely. Stress, because we've got no TB. Although sheep bring a lot of stress, so I don't know if it is actually less stress.
Could say that, but they're lovely as well in their own way.
They are lovely, and we're kind of like terrible farmers in the sense we name all of our sheep. I'm like awful. We've got all sorts of names going on. So like when you're like, come on, Beryl, get a grip, and you're like find yourself showing that, you think to yourself, what has my life become?
Oh, brilliant. Let's talk about Dan. How did you first meet, and how did your relationships develop?
So we met, going back like 12 years ago now, in the way that lots of people met 12 years ago at the pub, before kind of all of this, all this online dating thing and whatever. But yeah, we met in the pub, and it was really funny because it was actually just before silage season started. And so he was an agricultural contractor, and we exchanged numbers, but I didn't actually see him for about 6 weeks because obviously silage comes first.
Of course.
Obviously. So we didn't actually go on like a first date for many, many weeks until the rain came. And then when the rain came, it was like, yep, I can go now. So, off we kind of went, and that was it really. And then obviously kind of as silage season finished, and we got to kind of know each other a bit more, and it developed from there really.
What was he like as a person?
When I first met him, I remember thinking he was like total opposite to me. I'm quite like highly strung. I'm quite like spontaneous. I'm a bit wild, some might say. I just like everything's 100 miles per hour, whereas he was very, very calm and chilled out and everything else. And that was kind of I remember that being my first kind of thought when I met him. But actually, as kind of time went on, what was quite apparent was he used that as a bit of a disguise for his quite severe kind of, what I know now to be anxiety and depression. Yep. I didn't know that at the time, but that's kind of what it was. And so this cool, calm character actually underneath was almost like, on the surface, very cool and calm, but like a duck underneath. His legs were kind of pedaling faster than he could imagine and couldn't really control too much. And I think as time went on, that became more and more clear kind of with the actions and some of the things that kind of went on that really kind of showed to me, actually, there's something not right here. But again, didn't know at that time that it was mental health issues. We weren't having those discussions, so I didn't really understand at that point that that's what was going on with him. Yeah,
and I mean, he was a self-employed contractor. Before, sort of in the prep for this interview, I listened back to your interview with Will on rock and roll farming. it was quite a while ago now. Actually, you did that, and you were describing in that, which I think probably lots of self-employed people, lots of farmers will resonate with this. But the fact that there's always that slight feeling, well, maybe am I doing enough? There was that feeling of anxiety came through literally through his work.
Oh yeah, and it was constant. It was like this whole kind of thing of like the pressure of being self-employed and having to make sure that, you know, he worked those hours. But it was also the other things involved as well. Like, right, I need to put aside that money for my tax and national insurance and kind of all these added extra pressures that were going on. But it was also this just constant thing of like, I've got this work now, but what happens over the winter? Like, you know, I might not have any work, and am I going to have work? And he took the decision to purchase a digger.
Yeah.
And I remember having this conversation with him, and he was saying, you know, I think I'm going to buy a digger. I was like, okay. He said, yeah, I think it'd be really good. You know, I can kind of control everything that's going on a bit better. And in the winter months when things are a bit quieter, I can go out and do that. So yeah, great. You know, I thought that's fine. And as far as I was concerned, I was just wanted to kind of support him and make sure that, you know, he was kind of felt like he was being supported in his decisions, and really, really naively kind of presumed that it was going to be like a little digger. It wasn't. It was a bloody massive digger. And I remember this thing turning up, and I was thinking to myself, oh my God, you know, it was huge. It was massive. It took a lorry. I think it was like, I don't know, it was 20 ton or 15 ton or something, stupidly big digger. And I remember just looking at it thinking, oh my God, what are we going to do? And I couldn't show that, because already, even before it started, he was like, well, what if I don't get work, and how am I going to pay for it? And how am I going to move it around? And every time I move it, it's going to cost money. And what happens if something goes wrong with it? And all of these things were kind of going across his head. And I was just like, oh, I'll be fine, you know. And he'd built up loads of kind of connections with the, you know, obviously working in different farms over the years. So his idea was to stick primarily to kind of agriculture and take his dig around and, you know, digging out slurry pits or whatever needed doing. And I think it was just this, it was this thing that he wanted to do to kind of make things better for him. But it was also this extra added stress that caused so much anxiety for him that I couldn't even comprehend the stress that would have, you know, on his life. And it was just an accumulation of so many different things that were kind of sitting on his shoulders constantly. You know, it'd be things like, right, taxing his vehicle and insuring the vehicle, and then insuring and taxing the digger, and then, you know, sending out bills. He hated sending out bills, hated it, because he felt like really awkward asking people for money, because I mean, I do, you know, I when we've kind of like we've sold off pigs and sheep and whatever, and you feel like, oh, that's this much money, but you know, it's all right, just have a discount, you know, because whatever. And I find it so awkward. And I remember saying to him at the time, like, you've done the work, like, you've earned that money, just ask for it, that's fine. And he wouldn't bill people because he'd be kind of like, you know, thing about that. And it was, and then he'd worry about money. And so it was just this constant thing that was going on all the time that, you know, resonates with a lot of not only agricultural contractors, but like I said, farmers themselves, and that kind of whole pressure of being self-employed and also being governed by the weather and being governed by everything else, really, isn't it? Lack of control, I think.
Yeah. And you had two children together, which must have brought them, by its very nature, a lot of joy, surely.
Yeah, totally. But and then the flip side, it also brought a lot more pressure as well. You know, I remember kind of being pregnant with my eldest daughter, Mally, and it was a really like exciting time, really scary. You know, I was 24 and I was thinking, oh my God, you know, I can't even look after myself. How am I going to look after a child? And kind of stress of that. But it was like, do you know what? It's fine. Like, I've got this very kind of positive outlook on life where it'll be fine. We'll work it out. It'll be all right. Whereas Dan would like, it would really bother him, and he would be like really stressing out about it. And I remember being pregnant, and he was like, what if she goes to school and ends up being bullied? And I was like, oh my God, I can't even like think that far ahead, you know. And it would literally be, he would overthink everything to the point where it would just really just bring him down, you know, really bring him down. And all these kind of oversights and thoughts, you know, going towards the future. And, you know, when Tristan was born, then you know, things really escalated, and you could see then at that point his mental health was kind of so much worse at that point. And, you know, Tristan was really, really ill when he was really little. He developed quite a nasty cough at like 8 or 9 days old, and ended up with a collapsed lung. And when he was about 10 days old, and we ended up in hospital. And, you know, the pressure of that was just horrendous. And, you know, it was just kind of, he just didn't deal with things. The best way I can describe it is, I think he didn't have that toolkit So if something happened, he didn't have that kind of resilience and that toolkit to be able to deal with those things. He kind of just went into shutdown, and then he didn't really know how to come out of that shutdown. And it was just this constant thing of, when these things happened, and they didn't necessarily have to be big things like that. They could be small things, but whatever they were would send him into shutdown and kind of really struggle to bring him back out of that, really.
Yeah, because we're talking, what, about 10 years ago?
Yeah, so Mali's 10 now, and Tristan is he's going to be 8 now at the beginning of next year. So we're going back quite a few years with this now. Yeah,
because and back then, I mean, you know a lot more about this than me, but it's like, just thinking about the language in that toolkit that we use when we talk about mental health. What was that like then? Did it actually exist?
Yeah, I just don't think it did. I remember, when things were kind of hit a really sort of bad point. I think it was when Mali was quite small. I think Mali must have been about 2 or something. So it's going back 8 years ago. And I remember kind of like typing into the internet all the different things that I felt was going on. I was like, overthinking, can't get himself out of bed, really struggles kind of with motivation. And, he'd spend like hours just sitting down, just staring into space without being able to kind of get himself to do anything. And there was all these kind of things coming up, and it was like depression. And I was like, oh, I don't know anybody who gets depression. Like, it blew my brain a little bit. And, I was a bit kind of thing about it. And then there was one particular incident where we'd had really poor weather, at home. And I decided to come back to where my parents lived over the other side of the mountain, just to kind of, so I could get back to work a bit easier with the snow and stuff like that. And I remember switching on the laptop, ready to do some work, and he'd been on the laptop the night before, and there was a thing on there, and he'd been on YouTube looking at how to tie a noose. And I remember looking at that and thinking, oh my God, he's going to kill himself. But the word suicide kind of didn't really come into my head at that point, because it was just like, it wasn't a word that was being said. It wasn't common vocabulary for me, And I looked at that and I thought, right, we've kind of got massive problems, and went into a bit of a panic mode. But in my head, I was like, I can't say this to him that I've seen this, because if I tell him I've seen this, he's going to go and do it. So I kind of went into, I don't even know how to describe it. I went into kind of like just this mode of just stopping him from doing anything, and spent, a great deal of time, I suppose, just trying to avoid what was probably quite obvious for quite a long time, really, that he was suicidal. But like you said, that vocabulary wasn't being used at that time, and that kind of language wasn't being used. And people who had these mental health issues, who attempted suicide, were referred to as nuts and mental and crazy and all these kind of things. And there was such negative connotations around it that people just didn't want to be associated with that. And quite we were kind of governed by the media at that point. You've only got to look at things that were happening around that period. And before that, like Frank Bruno, for example, very public breakdown was, front page newspapers, he's nuts, he's crazy. Well, if you're having similar things to that, and that's what they're saying about him, you don't want that said about you. So those conversations just weren't happening, around mental health at that point at all.
And did he talk to you about any of this? I mean, again, not having the language is very, very difficult to even broach it, I suppose. But either you or his family, did he say that there's something not right here?
No, not in the slightest. And I remember, like I said, when I Googled all of those symptoms and these things came back, I remember turning to him and saying to him, like, I think you might have depression. And I even at one point considered, would he be bipolar? And like, I'm no expert. This was a Google kind of diagnosis at this point. And he went ballistic, absolutely ballistic. He's like, I'm not mental, like, I'm not psycho, what are you trying to say to me? And because we had that negative view at that point of what those sorts of things were. When I was saying to him, I think you might have depression or this, it was just too much. And I think probably realistically deep down he probably knew that what was going on, but I think actually admitting that out loud was something that was a totally alien concept to him, for many reasons. He was a young man. He didn't want to admit that those failings. He had a family that he wanted to look after and take care of. And pride, a massive part of it as well, is pride. And it's a huge kind of thing to turn around and admit that you've got that. And especially at that point, those kind of in that period of time and previous to that as well, it was something that just wasn't done. If I'm completely honest, it just wasn't spoken about in any way, shape or form.
So take us to July 2016, and just if you can just take us through the events.
Yeah, so it was, as I kind of mentioned earlier, there was this like whole thing of like sometimes he'd be really good and well, not really good. He'd be there. And then other times he'd kind of dip right down. And when something kind of sat on his shoulders, it would drag him right down to the bottom. And we'd kind of lived life like that really for quite a while. Like I said, there was this issue with me finding that YouTube video. And I remember thinking, I've just got to do everything I can to try and stop this from happening. So I did for a long period, like things like hiding ropes. And, if you went outside, I'd be out there checking on him and making sure he was okay and still alive. I must have been like the most naggy wife on the planet. Because I was like, you okay? Everything right? And just making sure he was basically still alive and not anything else. And yeah, so it got to July 2016 and, Daniel wasn't exactly the most of sociable people. He'd be sociable around the people he knew and he was comfortable with, but anybody who he wasn't kind of familiar with, he wouldn't socialize too much. So obviously at this point we were actually living not far away from where I'd grown up. We'd bought a house there in the local village, so he didn't know a huge amount of people and he really kind of struggled with that. We'd actually had a really nice weekend. The weekend before he died, we'd gone on a tractor run with Mali's play group, and we'd done things together as a family, which wasn't something we did a huge amount of because of his sort of social anxiety.
Okay.
So we ended up going after this tractor run, and he went to the pub and various kind of things. And he wasn't a big drinker, but he mainly because he knew that drink really didn't react very well with him. He found himself kind of slipping into really kind of bad depression. Well, he thought at that point it was like a low mood. It kind of, the hangover didn't sit well, basically, but it kind of really made his depression kind of so much worse. So he really drank, but he decided that night to have a drink and came back and was just kind of in a real state about everything. There was some chat at the pub, and anyway, he kind of got himself into a right state about it all and just really struggled to bring himself out. And this was kind of the Saturday night, and on the Sunday I was just like, it'll be fine, and I kind of did what I normally did on a Sunday and went shopping and whatever else have you. The Monday then I went to school and was in work, and he texted me saying, like, I'm really bad, like I can't get my way out of this. And even kind of no matter how many times we'd had lows up until that point, he'd never really said like, I can't really sort this out.
Yep.
So this for me was like a red flag.
Yeah.
And then I did what I thought was right at that point. And I was like, I'm gonna make you a steak, because steak makes everything better. And I'm gonna, cook you a nice tea and have a good night's sleep and all that kind of thing, just to try and kind of make things better, trying to fix. And that was me. I was a fixer. I wanted to fix all the time. So I got home, I made supper and sorted everything out, and he just couldn't shift this kind of feeling of unease at all. And he said, I'm going to go up and I'm going to go and see my family over the other side of the mountains. I said, yeah, that's really good. He's going to go and talk to somebody else. That's fine.
Was that something that you do normally?
Yeah. Oh yeah, totally. Really
yeah.
kind of close with his family and especially kind of with his grandmother. And so for him to be able to go and speak to them was quite normal. But I also kind of really thought that it was important for him to do, because as far as I was concerned, if he was talking to somebody about what was going on in his head, then that was great.
Yeah.
So we went up there and he didn't come home, basically. He rang at 2:00 in the morning. And I was just like, where are you? Come home. He's like, I'm just going to go to my mum's. I was like, don't be ridiculous. Like, it's 2:00 in the morning. And he was looking after the children the next day. And I remember him just going, you know what, I really love you. And I was like, yeah, like whatever, come on, just come home, don't be stupid. I just thought, I was half asleep, like didn't know what was going on.
Yeah.
And that was the last time I ever spoke to him. I woke up in the morning of July the 5th and couldn't find him. And so, yeah, that kind of was the start of where everything really went very, very downhill very quickly, because I knew something was wrong. I don't know why. I can't explain the feeling that I had, which was just completely in my gut, which told me this is bad, like really bad. I remember ringing round, and I was supposed to go to school, and I couldn't go into work because I had to find him. And I just knew that whatever was going on was just, it was something in my head told me this is going to end horrendously. So I jumped in his truck because he went in my car the night before. And I drove up to where he was brought up on. He's brought up in a small holding, and I went and drove up there, and I drove down the corner and around, and I was greeted by a row of police cars. And I just remember this policeman coming up to me and just saying, "I'm really sorry." And I was like, "Well, what are you sorry about? Like, why are you sorry?" And he was like, "Daniel's dead. He hung himself on the tree outside where we had lived. We lived there for a short time, and he'd gone there. He hadn't gone to his mum's, like he said. He'd gone straight there, and he took the decision to end his life.
How did you talk to the children about it?
So Mally was 4 at the time. Tristan was only 14 months. He was a baby. He didn't have a clue what was going on with him. Mally was a very, very astute 4-year-old. She was like on the ball. So she'd gone, I'd made my mum come over so I could go and look for him. She'd gone to playgroup. And I got home after this had happened. I went and I said, I've got to go and see Mally, and I've got to get home. And so I got in the car. I drove off, much to the police officers' annoyance. They weren't happy with me just driving off. And I got home and I spent about 10 minutes with my mum, just in pure kind of disbelief. And I said, I've got to go and speak to Mally. I've got to go and tell her what's going on, because her dad was everything to her, absolutely everything. So I drove over to the playgroup, and she was like, what are you doing here? You never pick me up. You're the one that works all the time. Why are you here? And I drove up to the reservoir that's quite close to where we live. And she was like, where are you taking me? She was asking me these questions, and I just couldn't speak. And we got up there and we sat up there, and I just said, I just said to her, I'm really, really sorry. And she said, why are you sorry? I said, I'm really sorry, but Daddy's not coming back. Daddy's gone and he's not coming back. She was like, where's he gone? And I said, he's gone to heaven. He was really, really poorly. And he was so poorly that he couldn't get past that. And he had to go to heaven in order to make himself feel better inside. And she was looking at me and she was like, but he didn't say goodbye. And this was what she felt most grieved about, was the fact that she wanted to say goodbye. And she said to me, well, we've got to go and get a ladder, because I've got to get up there to those clouds in heaven, and I want to say goodbye to him, because he's gone and he's not said goodbye. And this was just this whole kind of horrific thing of trying to explain to a 4-year-old that there is no goodbye. And I was so full of all these questions, and I literally didn't know what was going on, and trying to comprehend that myself, and then trying to explain that to a 4-year-old was just, it was hell. There's no other way to describe it. It was hell. And I remember just thinking, where on earth are we going to go from this point? And we were both kind of sat in the car looking out across this reservoir, with her, telling me she wanted to go up and say goodbye. And she just turned to me and she said, we're going to be okay, Mummy. We're going to be okay. And I was just like, gone. I was gone.
Oh my goodness.
And so that was kind of really tough. And then, obviously the days leading after that were tough. But actually, I think as time has gone on, I had to have a very similar conversation with Tristan. When Mally turned she was 6, until Mally turned 6. I remember her saying to me, well, how did he die? Like, I know he was really unwell, but how did he die? And, having to talk to your 6-year-old about suicide and about the fact that he chose to take his own life, because I was really adamant that there were going to be no lies in this. I can't tell her that something happened and then, God forbid, she found out I'd lied to her, that trust would be gone forever. So I had to be honest with her about that. So I was honest with her, and it was sickening. It was sickening having to talk to her about suicide. And I remember messaging the parents of her friends in school and just saying, I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry if I've exposed your child to this conversation, but I have to be honest with her, and I have to be able to talk to her about what happened to her dad in an open and honest way. And then, she was like really upset about the fact that he'd chosen to do that and couldn't really understand why. And then similarly, last year, I had to have the same conversation with Tristan. Tristan's now 7, and when he turned 6, again, similar sort of conversations. And we were kind of I can't remember what we were doing. We were out and about, something with the ducks, I think, outside. And he said to me, well, what did happen to my dad? How did he die? And again, this whole conversation of like suicide and stuff. And I remember Tristan saying to me, well, why didn't he get help? Like, he should have asked for help. He should have asked somebody to help him. And I felt in my mind that, in one weird kind of way, there was a positive in that, in the sense that how much of a shift have we made to the fact that Tristan knew to ask for help?
Absolutely.
Like, he knew. And in my mind, I was like, it was awful, but I still it was kind of that ability for him to see that he should have done this and he should have done that. And that for me was kind of like a real positive. And I think part of that is because he's grown up with the foundation being a big part of his life, you know, and that kind of thing.
What were other things? I'm struggling to ask these questions now, but what were other people's reactions? Did they know how to be with you at that time, or what to ask or what not to ask, or what to do?
I think this is one of the things that frustrated me the most, was because I remember somebody saying to me like, oh, you know, I didn't realize he had cancer. And I was like, he didn't have cancer. Wow. And then there was that. And then I remember Mally coming home from school, literally, because, you know, within weeks of it happening, saying, did Daddy's head fall off in a car accident? I was like, no, you know, this doesn't happen. And there was all these kind of things that were going about. But what became very clear very quickly was that Daniel had very severe mental health issues, and his suicide was caused by that. And, you know, the accumulation of all these mental health issues over the years.
Yeah.
And for me, it was like, why are we not talking about this? You know, why aren't people talking about this? Like, you know, the word suicide all of a sudden was a massive part of my life, yet nobody would turn to me and say, you know, Daniel committed suicide or he killed himself. And I just felt like it was this massive elephant in the room. And, you know, I remember going to like local shows and things like that, and walking up the shows, and people would look at me and kind of like tip their head at me and then put the head down and kind of avoid me. And then my dad, he was always like 10 steps behind because he was talking or looking at tractors and whatever. They'd always say to him, oh, you know, how's Emma doing? Is she okay? And I was like, why is nobody talking to me about this? Like, why is nobody asking me? And I remember my mum sort of turning to me saying, Emma, nobody knows what to say. Because if he was ill and had cancer or something like that, people could say, I'm so sorry, you know, it was so sad and things like that. But because he's chosen to take his own life, nobody knows how to deal with that. Like, nobody knows what to say to a 27-year-old woman whose husband has just taken that decision to kill himself. And I can't blame them. You know, I couldn't blame them at all. But in my mind, it was like, well, actually, we've got to start talking about this, because if we don't have these conversations about suicide, and we don't have these conversations about what led to this point, it's going to keep happening. And there's going to be like more people like me in this world. And at that point in time, I remember talking to somebody and saying, I don't want anyone to have to go through this. Like, what me and the kids and my family and everyone who knew Dan is going through is the worst thing ever. And I wouldn't wish that on anybody. And if I can do something to change that, then I will do whatever I can.
Yeah. And that's when DPJ came about. It's really interesting how you sort of say that in terms of not having the right words. And I did some suicide awareness training, which FCN organised. It must have been about 18 months ago or so. It was honestly one of the best things that I've ever done. The two trainers were fantastic, and absolutely key as part of that was just saying that we need to use the word suicide. It's like as simple as that. It's a whole language. It needs to be okay to actually say that, to say the word.
Yeah, it's like a dirty word that kind of was totally avoided. And I was probably, if anything, kind of overusing that word. I was like, I remember somebody saying to me, like, well, you can't say that Daniel committed suicide. You've got to say he took his own life. I'm like, no, he committed suicide. Let's talk about this. This is real talk here. He committed suicide. That is what he did. I'm not precious about language or anything like that. You know, this is what he did. Let's be upfront and honest about this, and let's talk about this and get it out in the open. And for me, that was kind of like vital to kind of have those open conversations.
Yeah. Because I mean, very, very soon after this, as you've said, the idea for the foundation came about. So tell us about DPJ, the DPJ Foundation, and how you went about setting it up.
You know, like I said, pretty much, I mean, Daniel passed away on the Monday night, like early hours Tuesday morning. And I would say pretty much by the Thursday, I think I went on Thursday to identify, I had to go up and identify the body. And that's not something that you expect to find yourself doing. You know, we'd not really even been married that long. And I just look back and I was so young, you know. And I remember going up there and I was saying to the person I was with, you know, I'm gonna do something about this because this is wrong. And I literally woke up the night he died screaming, like, this is wrong. So many aspects of this are wrong. He shouldn't be dead. I shouldn't be a widow, my kids shouldn't be without a dad, that everything was wrong. And I kept saying, I'm going to do something about this. And we got to kind of arranging the funeral, and one of the chaps who was coming to help us with the Reverend was helping us with the funeral. He was saying, right, you've got to choose charity as part of, what you want to, with the funeral donations and whatever else have you. So I started looking and ploughing myself into finding a charity that supported people with mental health issues. But I was really disappointed to see at that point there was no charities that supported people like Dan. And, yes, there was fantastic charities out there like Mind and Samaritans and things like that. But realistically, I know that Dan would have never have called them for numerous reasons, but he would never have also walked into Mind, because Mind was in the centre of town. He was a farmer. Yep. He needed something that suited him and his, the way he lived his life. And there was nothing like that. And so I was sat there chatting to him, and I said, I just don't know what to do. I don't know. I think what I'll do is I'll gather the money together from the funeral and give myself a bit more time and kind of work out what I want to do with that money and who I can give it to, because there's got to be something out there. And he turned around to me, he said, well, why don't you do something? Like you could do this, you could make this change that is needed there. And I was like, I think in one of like the most darkest periods ever, that was almost like the light that I needed to kind of push me through. And it was just like, yeah, do you know what? Actually, I can do this. Like, I can do something that is going to make a difference and make a difference to people. And it was literally like that. And we were sat there, and they said, what are you going to call it? I was like, oh, we'll just call it the DPJ Foundation, because Dan was like a proper man child. He had like loads of tools and like everything he wrote on, everything tools he had, and even on his digger that I inherited, this massive bloody digger, said DPJ on it. It was his initials. So he was Daniel Picton Jones, and everything was DPJ. So I remember saying like, oh, we'll just call it the DPJ Foundation for now. We've got loads of time. It's a shit name, but I swear. We can always change it again. And we kind of had this sort of thing. It was like, oh, it'll be fine. It'll change. And here we are, 6 and a bit years later with still with the same name, but having kind of, grown to sort of places that I never imagined would. And it's amazing, really.
Wow. Well, I see, Emma, you're amazing. For finding that light. It's just, so let's talk about what it is that the foundation does. What does it do day to day? What are its aims? How does it work in practice?
So weirdly enough, the kind of aims of the charity haven't really changed since that first week that I started it, which is quite funny, really, because there was kind of a few things that I picked up on straight away that I felt that needed to change. The first one was the fact we needed to start talking about this. We had to have these conversations. Like I said to you just now, we need to talk about suicide. We need to talk about mental health. So the first thing I wanted to do was spread awareness and make sure people had the knowledge of mental health and understood that it was a real issue, but also, that they knew there was help available. And then the second kind of aspect of that then was making sure that help was available. And that's where kind of our Share the Load service came. So it came about kind of wanting to provide support for people in the farming community, but not really sure what to do. And through kind of a lot of research and stuff, which, really kind of almost, I suppose, saved me at that point. It gave me something to focus on. And I spoke to lots of people and found out that counselling and talking therapy is the single most effective way of dealing with poor mental health. So I went around the same time. I'd been ploughing myself into the DPJ Foundation and kind of that kind of thing. I'd set up a Facebook page. We were having fundraisers already. And all my friends and family were like, you're not grieving, Emma. You need to grieve. And I was like, right, okay. So I'll just go to the doctors. And I didn't know what I could do to grieve. I had 2 small children. And the Saturday after Dan died, I was at a birthday party because I couldn't not be there for them. Life had to carry on and for them. And so I didn't understand how to grieve. So I went to the doctors and I asked if I could see a counsellor, and they said, yeah, that's fine, ring this line and whatever. So I rang them and they rang me back a week later. I left an answering message. They rang me back a week later and said, yeah, that's great. We'll see you probably in about 8 months now when a space becomes available. And I was like, 8 months? I was like, I mean, I'm all right now, but I could be in a horrendous place in 8 months' time. Where am I going to be? And I started like asking around, and I called calling around and saying, well, how long is your waiting list for counselling? 8 months, 12 months, 15 months, all of this going on. And I thought, that is not good enough. But then I also started thinking about, like, even if a farmer wanted cancer, like, where would they go? Because my dad, who was a farmer, my granddad, who was a farmer, and Dan, who was a contractor, they wouldn't go to the doctors, like, ever. The doctor was like a no-go situation. So I was like, to even access that counselling in the first place would have been a huge obstacle. So I actually went private for counselling and worked out how bloody expensive it was at the same time, and decided
I've done the same thing.
Yeah. And I was just
crazy.
like, oh my God, it is crazy money. And I remember thinking, there are so many barriers to this life-saving support. There are so many barriers up to it. Why are we making waiting lists so long? Why is it so bloody expensive? Why do people have to jump through hoops to get it? So I was like, right, I'm going to create this service. And so by this point, I'd had like a group of friends who said they were going to kind of support me with this. And I called a meeting. And I spent like ages at my laptop with all of these ideas and stuff. And I was like, right, we're going to have this service. And I wrote this thing and I was like, and this is how it's going to work. We're going to have a 24-hour call line, because it's got to be 24 hours because farmers are like busy people and they need to be able to call in the night. None of this finishing at 5 o'clock business. 24-hour call line. When they call that call line, they're going to speak to a human being. They're not going to speak to an answering message. They're going to speak to a human, and that human is going to know all about farming, so that they don't have to take 2 hours explaining what TB is or whatever's gone on that day. That person knows what they're talking about. When they've spoken to that person, within 24 hours, a counsellor will be sent to them to either ring them or sent them to their door, and they will have their first appointment within a week. And this is how we're going to do it. We are going to fundraise money to pay for this counselling. We're going to provide this counselling this quickly, and this is how we're going to do it, and blah blah blah. And we're going to do a text service, because lots of people don't like talking on the phone. And so I came to them this idea, and they were just like, oh my God, she's lost it, like, look at her go. She's like, literally. This was probably in the like October, I think, after Dan died in the July, and they were just like, you need to calm down a bit. And I was like, no, this is what we've got to do. So I set about setting up this service, and spent basically a year kind of getting everything sorted and making sure that we took on a range of volunteers who were all Samaritan trained. And we basically still run the service, but pretty much exactly the same now. And I'd kind of started alluding on social media, this is what we were trying to do. And even before we started up this call line in that January, we already had people calling through saying, look, I hear you're offering this, I could really do with some help. And we took 4 calls, I think, like in the week before we even launched the fact that we were doing this, and we tried to keep it under wraps. I'm like the least secretive person ever. I've got the biggest mouth in Pembrokeshire. So I was telling everybody, I was like, we're going to do this and whatever. And I mean, effectively to this day, we still run it exactly the same. And that service has been running now for 4 years, just over 4 years. And we've supported near enough 700 people with fully funded counselling, and we still pretty much are able to offer that initial contact with a counsellor within 24 hours and first appointment within a week. But we also do counselling slightly differently. So when I went to counselling, I had to go to a local village and have a town, it was actually, and have it in the main high street and stuff. And I remember thinking, like, Dan would hate this, like he would hate it. I was standing outside this door, which had a massive sign above it saying counselling. I remember someone driving past, like, beep, 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 like, hi, Emma. And I was like, oh, yes, here I am going into
it's so true, isn't it? It's so true.
Like, and he would like never have done that, because it was, embarrassing for him. He would have felt like he didn't want people to know his business. We're private, and, farmers are proud people, and we didn't want to know that. So I was like ringing around counsellors, asking them to be part of this service I was setting up. And I was like, right, but will you go to a farm? And they were like, yeah, okay, I think so. And I was like, look, I need you to do this, because ultimately I can't expect farmers to step away from the farm for like 2-3 hours potentially. So what I want you to do is be able to go to them, so that if they're milking, you can sit in the milking parlour with them. If they're sat at the table and they're just having their lunch, you can sit in the lunch with them. And that's what they did. And we've had loads of counsellors who've actually gone out and walked the land with farmers and sat in the milking parlour with them. And I remember one woman very early on in the beginning, she rang me, and we were kind of checking in a lot on our counsellors and making sure they were safe going back and forth from farms and stuff. And I said, everything okay? She was like, yeah, there was a sheep under the table while I was talking to him. I was like, yeah, it's fine, don't worry, get used to it, you'll be all right.
Crack on.
And I remember saying to this one counsellor, like, I'll buy you wellies, like, just get on with it, you'll be fine, like, don't worry. And it is, and the service is pretty much, like I said, run kind of in that way since that point. And I'm really proud of kind of the fact that we've now got a huge amount of volunteers who run our call line 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and that's all year long. We don't ever stop answering the phone. We are there all the time. And although we've provided counselling to over 700 people, the amount of people who just call because they need somebody to talk to is probably almost double or triple that. We're the volunteers we have are just the most outstanding group of people who have the most passion and empathy for people. It's unbelievable. So there was that aspect of it, and then the kind of third aspect of it is the training side of it. So it was the ability to kind of really put the onus on those in the community to look after each other. And I think that's one thing that the farming community are really good at, is supporting each other. And if something happens, we're the first people to rally around and offer practical help. But actually, how many of us know how to provide that mental health support and that conversation and that listening ear? And, too many times I've been, part of conversations where something goes wrong and everyone's like, right, we're going to do this. We'll go and do this and whatever. And this was me. Like, I was a fixer. So something went wrong with Dan. I was like, steak, that's fine. That'll tick that box. And I was like, I'll book you an MOT test. I'll sort that. I'll put new tires on this. I'll get oil for the digger or whatever it needed to be. I was a fixer. People don't need fixing.
No.
People need somebody to listen.
Yeah,
and this was the really important part of it, was enabling people to understand how to listen. And not only how to listen, but how to listen and then how to get that person to kind of understand where the support is and what that's available. So I trained myself up in mental health first aid. I went out and did my mental health first aid course. I came back. I delivered a few of them. And then I thought to myself, this is good. Like, don't get me wrong, the information is great. But this has got nothing to do with farmers. All of the scenarios were like John, who works in an office and gets the bus home and stuff like that. It was just not at all relevant. So I sat on my laptop and I rewrote it. I rewrote all of it and created mental health awareness training for the farming community and started to go out and deliver it, and went all over Wales delivering this training. And we've trained, in excess of thousands of people in this mental health awareness training. And so it's kind of gone to the point now where I did this up until a point, and then I actually went back to teach. Then I took a year off to do this kind of full time. And then COVID hit. I decided that being at home wasn't my bag. I kind of needed to go be out in humanity again. So I decided to go back to teaching. And at that point, we took on some members of staff, which was the first thing, the first time we took on staff in 6 years is 2 years ago. Okay. So we have a training manager now who's taken that training and really kind of blown it up massively, which is amazing. And she goes all over doing it. I think she's up in Scotland now in a few weeks. She's actually in Welshpool tonight delivering training, and it's effectively still exactly the same as what we used to do, but just better. And it talks about suicide, and like you said about your training, it's a massive part of it is suicide. Also understanding that talking about suicide isn't a problem, and actually asking the question about suicide isn't a problem either.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Honestly, just thank you to you, all your wonderful volunteers, and clearly your great staff as well. But I just want to go back actually to the grief thing that you were mentioning. And I'm interested in, you said you didn't know how to grieve at the time. And don't worry about answering this if you don't want to. But when you discovered what that was, what did it look like? And how long did it take? People always say, and we've all experienced grief at various stages for various reasons. And people often say, isn't it, it will strike when you it'll strike when you least expect, or it'll be a very gradual process. Or what did it look like for you?
It was really weird because I felt like I was so young at that time. And I think that in my head, I had a very kind of idealistic way of what grief should look like. It should be this whole kind of like somber thing. And the next day would be tears. And the next day I'd feel okay. And then I felt guilty for feeling okay because I wouldn't forget about it. But I remember it was my birthday. So in between the him passing away and the funeral, it was my birthday. And a couple of my friends made this big effort and got me a cake and stuff. And I remember someone turning to me saying, I'm not going to buy you a birthday cake because it's not a very happy occasion. And I was just like, but it's my birthday. And I was like, it was really weird. And grief, I found it really difficult to understand what grief was. But I think if there's anything that I've learned is there is no grief box that you have to fit into. Grief looks different for every single person. It can be feeling like completely sad for months and months on end. It can be feeling sad for a day and then upset for a day and then angry. And that's what I found difficult, was the anger, because I was angry at him. I was angry for what he did to me, and I was angry for what he did to the children. And then I remember sort of being told, oh, join these like bereavement groups with other people that are grieving. And a lot of the people that were there were people who were grieving people who, like I said, had died from kind of, diseases and things like that, or old age. And it was totally different because they felt, I don't know how to describe it. They felt overwhelming sadness constantly. Whereas I didn't get that. I got sad sometimes. I got angry sometimes. I got really angry other days, you know, and it's still like that now. Like, it's a really cliche thing to say, but time is a really good, and I wouldn't say it's a healer, but time helps you deal with things better. And I think as time got on, I kind of just got more used to life. And don't get me wrong, there's still things that happen. And I think to myself, oh, you know, when I get angry and I get sad about it and things like that. But time gives you the benefit of being able to learn that you can live life again, and that you can do things that you probably didn't think in that instant period that you could do. And once you learn that you can do those things and you allow yourself to kind of live again and do those things, you learn that life, it sounds awful, but life goes on, and it has to go on, because you've got two roads. And I remember I said the same thing to Mally, you know, when I was talking to Mally at the point that it happened, I had two options. This was either going to take over my life, and I was going to end up being, you know, hugely depressed and upset for the rest of my life, or I was going to take what happened, I was going to learn from it, and I was going to actually use it as a force for good going forward. And I think that goes with everything. You know, when my grandfather died, it was the same thing. It was like, I can sit here and I can cry for weeks on end, but what good is that going to do me or anybody else? Or I can learn from that. I can take the things that he taught me, and as I, you know, and then the funny stories and the things that we did when we were kids, and shoving apples and things down his mouth when he was sleeping on the couch and whatever else have you. But you can learn to grow from that. And I think that it's a really difficult thing for people to process. But I'm, again, great advocate for counselling, and counselling really helped with my grieving process. It helped me realize that I was normal, and despite people telling me that I wasn't grieving, I was, but it was just my way of doing it. And it's okay to feel okay and not okay, and cry and sad and angry and stuff. Just roll with it.
What would your advice be to people who are supporting people who are experiencing depression, anxiety, other mental health
I think my kind of biggest bit of advice would be to take care of yourself, because never underestimate the impact that it can have taking care of somebody who has got really poor mental health. Because I didn't realize it until quite a long time afterwards that Daniel's mental health had a massive impact on mine. And for somebody who'd always seen herself as somebody with very positive and good mental health, I found myself struggling with my mental health as well, because of the impact of his and kind of that. I would say take care of yourself and make sure that you are putting yourself first at times too, but also to seek help for yourself, because sometimes you need support when you're supporting other people. I highly recommend taking training. You know, I'm not saying you have to have the training with DPJ Foundation at all. They're, you know, fantastic at it, but get some training, because, you know, when you can learn how to have these conversations around mental health and have those conversations around suicide, it opens up this whole kind of other realm of being able to support that person in a way, you know, that you wouldn't even realize. And I think I don't have regrets, because I can't live in regret with what happened, but I've certainly learned a lot. And I think if I could go back and say things, I would do things so differently. You know, I would talk about suicide. The day that I found that video, I would talk about that. I would say to him, look, Dan, you know, I think you're depressed, and I think it's because of this, this, and this. And I would kind of ask him about what was going on. And instead of trying to fluff over everything, I'd be saying, look, I can see you're really upset here, actually. You know, I can understand that you're feeling really sad about this. Tell me about, you know, how you're feeling, and talk to me about what's gone on, and talk to me about this, and have those conversations, and allow him to, all of this weight and stress is on his shoulder, allow him to release that by talking, because talking is what matters. But if you're helping somebody, it's not the talking, it's the listening. And it's all about listening and taking in what that person is saying and supporting them through that.
Wow. We're going to start to wrap this up. Honestly, you're such a strong person. This is the main thing that's coming through it. It's so inspiring. So the last few questions we always finish in this way. First is, Emma, if you have a message for the public, what would it be?
It's okay not to be okay. Brilliant. And it's fine to speak out and say, I'm not okay with that, and I'm not doing all right now.
Yeah, it's those small words have so much impact. I think it's so important to remember that. And a message for farmers.
My message to farmers would be, no matter what is going on and how rough things feel right now, things will always and can always get better. It's just sometimes you need to ask for help, and it is perfectly okay to ask for help. But speak up, use your voice, and don't be afraid to use your voice.
Well said. And any farming related podcast, blog, or social media account that you'd like to give a plug to?
Oh, well, I like to, I like to keep things a bit positive. So I really like following that Welsh farmer, Johan Humphreys.
Johan.
He's hilarious.
He's
and
great.
I proper fangirled in the Royal Welsh, because we were like just standing in this thing. We had a stand in the Royal Welsh show, and he walked past with this ridiculous hat on. I was like, oh my God, is that Welsh farmer? And I felt like, oh, come on, you're like a 34-year-old woman with 3 kids. Like, sort yourself out. But he's really good. And I really like the way that he shows like a really, the real life side of farming, and it can be really rubbish at times, but also the fact that it's really good to get out and have a bit of fun and live your life and have that sociable side of farming as well, and really honest about everything, and I really admire that.
We had a great chat on, but he was on the podcast a few weeks back, I think it was, and we had a great chat about mental health actually as part of that. In fact, guys, if you haven't listened to that episode already, head back to hear from Johan. So that's a great shout out of him. He will enjoy that. I think he's actually had 2 shout outs since he's been on. So, and I know he's listening now. So his ego, your ego can't get that big, but that's 2 shout outs now.
He won't be able to fit in that chicken shed door if he's careful. His head will get too.
And finally, how do people follow DPJ on social media?
So you can follow us on Instagram or on Facebook or on Twitter. And also we've got a website as well. So if you want any information, everything's on there, and all the numbers that you can call for the support and stuff. And I think it's just important to mention at this point that, our phone line is completely confidential. We don't take hardly any information about the person that's calling other than their first name and the area that they live in, basically, so that information can go to the counsellor. And all of our counsellors are professionals. They are all paid, they're all registered with the British Association of Counsellors and Counselling Practitioners, and we provide a really kind of confidential and professional service that really enable people to get the support they need. So anything you need, please get in touch, and we will help as much as we can.
Brilliant. Well, we will leave it there, but Emma, thank you so much for coming on and talking to me today. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate it, and I really hope that the listeners hearing your story and hearing Dan's story, it's another stage in more encouragement to get everyone talking, because it's what we need to do.
Totally.
That is it for today. Thank you very much for listening. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the show. You can also now join the Meet the Farmers Supporters Club on Patreon. I'm currently on a mission to make the podcast more sustainable, so your support through that would be very, very much appreciated. To support, simply visit patreon.com/Meet the Farmers. A quick mention of what's happening this week on our sister podcast, Rural Business Focus. I'm joined by the fantastic Becky Leach from Kite Consulting, and we're talking about recruitment and holding on to good people in your business. That's out tomorrow, and you can find it wherever you're listening to this podcast. Next week on Meet the Farmers, we'll be talking pigs with Yorkshire farmer Kate Morgan. So I hope you can join me then. I'm Ben Eagle. This has been Meet the Farmers. Thank you very much for listening to this very special episode, and I hope you all have a great week.